Welcome to another season of Pro-2-Pro, where we sit down with entrepreneurs and successful business people and talk about their journeys to their success in their career. We go behind the scenes and have candid conversations with them and discuss health, relationships, fitness, and of course, business decisions, good and bad. If you're looking for inspiration, valuable business insights, and a dose of motivation, you're in the right place. Join me and my guests as we share our experiences, ideas, and stories that can help you on your own journey of growth and success. Welcome, and remember, keep it Pro-2-Pro. So I'm bringing you back to another Pro-2-Pro podcast episode, but this is not going to be really a podcast episode. This is going to be more of a discussion. And one of the areas we wanted to talk a little bit about is medical consulting and kind of how it morphed from me being a lawyer and practicing and you deciding that you wanted to open up your own medical practice and what we went through to do all of that. And over the years, the experiences that we've learned and the things that we're doing now with clients and with people to help them in their particular business goals. To get started, one of the things that I'd want to ask you about, because you've been doing it now for many years, is there anything that you could share with our listeners or with our viewers in retrospect that you wish you did sooner rather than later in building the business?
I wouldn't change the path that's happened, right? But the one thing that I think we recognized was how little we knew in respect to what went into it. I mean, we knew that we didn't want to take on debt. That was a part of our business model, but we just realized that there were just so many moving parts. And I think we've learned through the years how much, I guess the best word to use is ambiguity, that there is when it comes time to figuring out all the nuances of being in compliance, you know, the requirements of your medical board, your health department versus the legal issues that you have to deal with respect to patient care. So the best advice really would be you just have to accept that there's going to be a lot of things that you don't know initially. And that's why having the right team there for you is important for all those moving parts. And even as we're seeing, you know, new legislative sessions coming with regard to new laws that are being introduced or being presented to the House for changes, that's the other thing that you have to always be on top of, is new laws will change how you can do things on a regular basis.
The practice of medicine itself is obviously, you know, ever changing. The nuances of different techniques are always changing. The products are always changing. It's an incredible, fast-paced business that is a multi-billion dollar industry. Mm-hmm. And you have so many different licensure of individuals practicing in different ways. We practice in Florida, but we consult in other states and help different practices go through whatever challenges they may have to deal with their boards, with their particular state, and be in compliance. But one of the things that I've found that happens to be consistent across the board is how much people don't know and how much rogueness goes on in the industry itself. And it's usually after the fact that I get involved, whether a mistake is made or they weren't planning accordingly. I mean, you had the benefit of me to an extent in which we were able to foundationally set up certain things the right way, you know, whether it be the corporate structure, whether it be, you know, the licensure, ensuring that the space that you were in was going to be the right space, you know, the contract negotiation. You handled a lot of the medical side with regard to your product, with regard to vetting out what particular equipment you want, all these different things. And then we run into the issue of staff and choosing the right staff and going through those particular challenges. You're also dealing with your education and your training and all the different things that you need to do.
And the importance of ongoing education.
Yeah,
right.
And how are you able to balance all those challenges in running the business and all of a sudden, and also dealing with a high maintenance husband, you know, such as myself? How have you been able to do all that?
Well, sometimes I'm not always handling it with grace. I mean, you know, you see moments where I'm not in peak performance. So it's just recognizing there's an ebb and flow. I think my most favorite phrase is don't try to make a circle fit into a square peg. If things just don't add up, put your foot on the brake and take a step back. I guess that also comes with getting older, recognizing that it's okay to just not make something work if it's not going to work, and being okay with that, and placing your focus then back on the things that you do make work. I think that the biggest learning curve for me, because I know that I'm very type A and I always expect this perfect, outcome for myself and for anybody that I work with, is recognizing that it's not always going to be like that, and that's okay.
In other words, striving for perfection.
Yeah, I am 1000% guilty of that. We talk about imposter syndrome and all the other things that go along with that. But I think that also comes with just being conscientious. And, there's a lot of wonderful traits that come along with being type A, as much as there is the negative side of that. But it's just about taking your time. When I was dealing with that plastic surgical group down in Sarasota, and that one of the docs at the time was the president of one of the plastic surgical societies. And he said something really interesting to me, because it goes back to how you were talking about regulation and how people are rogue and doing things. And he was really on a mission with regard to cosmetic surgeons. And he said, in the state of Florida, you can essentially just have MD or DO behind your name, and you could do, a lobotomy in your office, and there'd not be any repercussions for it, because there's just not that kind of tight regulation. So that's stuck with me, because over the years now we've seen, some deaths here in Tampa from cosmetic surgery and different things that have happened. There's 2 nurse practitioners out in Pinellas County performing liposuction under local anesthesia. And I'm just going, what is going on? And nothing happens. There's a lot of bad eggs in any field of business and whatnot. But it's really difficult to swallow when it happens in medicine, because we always have to first do no harm. So that's something I think that no matter what stage of planning you're in with your medical practice, the first thing you always need to have in mind is obviously that you need to always act in the best interest of your patients. So safety, my big thing, I think, when we first got things off the ground, that I was always really worried about was just the safety side of things, and then the legal side of things. But I think we've just learned over the years too, that there's still so many things that we encounter that it's so gray. You'll go to the Florida Board of Medicine or the Florida Board of Nursing, you go to the Department of Health, and each one kind of punts the ball back to the other. And you really don't get a specific position statement on something.
And you won't. And
Right.
You'll also I find all the time, in my endeavors, is that there isn't any clear-cut answer to these things, whether it be in the regulations or in case law. It's not until after the fact that you see things, and then people are managing after that. It's a very interesting phenomena, this space, this aesthetic space, because I can't really correlate it to any other area. Obviously, the impact of medicine changing all the time, but you have essentially, so many different cooks in a kitchen with all different expertises in a kitchen trying to make something.
It's funny that you're referencing that as cooks in the kitchen, because in every area of medicine, you have what are called clinical guidelines, right? So ACOG for obstetrics and gynecology, you have cardiology, every specialty presents clinical guidelines. And you formulate, let's say in primary care, you formulate your treatment algorithms for hypertension, renal failure, different disease processes, and you kind of follow those algorithms. So it's the recipe that you're given, essentially how to practice safely, and the recommendations and the guidelines. Aesthetic medicine, it's the one area where you're not going to be able to go into software like UpToDate, which is universally great software in the practice of medicine to give you really current information on things. You're not going to find that. It's kind of, even in some of the forums that I talk to other injectors from not only this country, but other countries, occlusions, vascular occlusions. You're not going to be able to walk into an emergency room and have an ER doc unless they moonlight in aesthetics that's going to say, oh, that's a vascular occlusion. We need to use Hylenex and we need to dissolve that. That's one of the areas that I would love to see some kind of consensus across this country, that we're making that a part of, emergency room practice, or, making it a part of training so that it's something that can be recognized, so that we know that most places are equipped to handle emergency situations. I mean, I've heard people call it like the cowboy day and age. I mean, it's very much kind of do what you want. And that's what people do.
Yeah, I would think we've been in it now for almost a decade. You've been in it more than a decade.
But on our own, about a decade.
Yeah, on our own. And you'd think that it would have evolved a lot more than it has. I think what's happened more so than anything else is that it's become much, much broader in scope with regard to players.
Oh yeah,
involved.
Because it's on every corner.
And the market is incredible for the money grab. And again, the lack of regulation and barrier to entry. The barrier to entry is not that difficult to achieve, unfortunately or fortunately, for the people that are earnest and want to do the right thing, Do
you know what's so jarring to me? I will receive messages from nurses to be, I want to go to school, I want to be an injector. What advice do you have? Well, obviously that, mentorship is so important, but what's so concerning to me is that there are people that are solely going to school for this. Like, go and learn how to practice, learn your specialty, learn how to recognize emergency situations. How are you going to handle a patient that vasovagals in the middle of an injection? Or, how are you going to recognize hypoglycemia? How are you going to recognize somebody that's having anaphylaxis if you don't actually practice? Because you learn things in school that you don't learn in practice. So that's one of the biggest concerns. With lack of regulation, as I've taken this journey in functional medicine and regenerative medicine, seeing and hearing from patients that I take on as new patients for functional medicine, that they get peptides from clinics where they literally do a drive-by. They go in and pick up syringes that are filled with whatever they're filled with, and no lab work done, no testing, no nothing. No face-to-face meeting with a clinician, nobody evaluating them. Somebody, just an office staff member, dispensing a medication to them and sending them on their way. And I'm shaking my head and I'm wondering, how is that happening? Especially in Florida.
Well, also they get them out of the country. They get stuff that's made, who knows where it's made,
right.
And they think they're shortcutting it. And it says not for human use.
And they're using it.
And they're putting it in their bodies.
Yep.
To save whatever, I don't know how much money they're saving on doing what they're doing, but at the end of the day, talk about diminishing returns. You don't even know what's happening to your body.
Well, again, yeah. I did post about that because it's so disconcerting to me. A sterile compounding pharmacy is just that, because they're removing the endotoxins from these formulated medications, these peptides. You're getting something that's not for human use. And who knows how many endotoxins you've just injected into your body that your body now has to deal with, if it can. But it's just a field, like you said, that has a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And I'm not sitting here saying that I think people should be micromanaged, or I think that what was that saying that we heard, that honest people don't see dishonesty?
Yeah.
So you just assume when you walk into some place that they have everything and, like they're supposed to have it. So I think that when a potential consumer or patient comes into a practice, they would expect that clinician has everything that they need to handle any emergency that's going to happen. And that's unfortunately just not the case. And I see that too. Well, I also am realizing that price drives so many decisions, and that's frightening to me. I mean, anything with regard to medicine or your face or your body, if it's too expensive for you, then don't do it. But for heaven's sakes, don't discount your body, and do things that could potentially put you at risk. There's that component to it. And then there's just this issue of, if you're not equipped to manage emergencies or things that can occur in relation to the business, then don't do it. Don't do it until you can do it right.
But you made an interesting point that people are going to school just purely for this particular area. Obviously, it's an exciting field to be in. Beauty, aesthetics, anti-aging. I mean, there's an appeal to it. I understand that. But again, foundationally, all the things you brought up are crucial to it, not to mention the ongoing needs of an individual to maintain and move forward in their career, that they have to take care of themselves from an educational perspective and a training perspective. You know, there's so many moving parts, and we get into it in our consultant practice after the fact. Unfortunately, in some instances, we have some clients that we help from a general practice perspective and guide them in the decision making, which I think is crucial to any medical practice, where you have the right people there to help you with these decisions, especially in light of what we discussed about that there's really limited rules. We're not saying that there's, nothing out there. It's a blank canvas. It just means that you need to be prudent with regard to the decisions that you're going to make.
Well, especially now too, because you see that there are personal injury lawyers that solely want to focus on the beauty industry, on the aesthetic industry with their work. So, and there is a need for that. And I mean, if personal injury lawyers that specialize in this type of field, maybe that will help reel in some of the...
Well, I handle, you know me, I'm doing it now as well on the other side. I'm representing businesses, and I'm also representing injured people. And at the end of the day, if there's accountability,
right, that
needs to take place. And unfortunately, that tends to be an issue. Where does it go? Is it malpractice? Is it negligence? Where,
Well, what was, at the end of the day, you ask, what was the standard of care? Was it met? If it's not, then that is negligent. And there needs to be repercussions for that. And I don't ever wish anything bad upon anybody, but I've seen it. I've had patients that have been harmed and not cared for in the way that they should have been cared for. And I know you've had clients in that respect. And then you've also had some businesses, some medical people that you've helped that were doing the right thing. And they just had somebody that was, hungry in a way that wasn't ethical. So there's both sides to it.
There's so many, I call, peeling the onion. There's so many layers of the industry itself, and so many areas you can go down. You can go down into non-competes. You can go down into, issues associated with employees, ex-employees. You can go into social media, and let's talk about the pictures that are taken of patients and posting on social media. You can go, who owns what? I mean, there are so many different areas. And what I find, taking patients, are patients property? Can you take your patient? It goes on in the industry.
I know that you and I might have a different viewpoint about non-competes. I don't agree with them. I mean, you saw one of the non-competes that I was expected to sign years ago, and you thought it was the most laughable thing that you'd ever seen because it was so restrictive. I mean, if a person wants to leave and wants to go, let them go and wish them well. I think the most important thing is just the preservation of your own business. So as long as you just have something in line that specifies that the person that's leaving isn't going to try to solicit your patient base that's yours, move on, go on your merry way. Take your Instagram with you, take your social media with you. This energy that is spent on, those are my patients, those aren't your patients, you can't work within 5 miles of me, it kind of becomes ridiculous after a while. It really does.
It's in your industry. I shouldn't say your industry, it's in the medical industry for the most part. And there have been some attempts to try to get rid of it. But as we speak, it's still there and it still exists. And unfortunately,
and it's not national, because in California they did away with non-competes. So it's the recognition, like, a person has a right to earn a living.
Yeah.
And if they're not happy with you, let them go.
The flip side to it, of course, is that like you stated, you don't want them poaching your patient base. But I always use the view, you don't want a patient that's going to flip and run away so easily anyway.
I don't look at it that way. If I had somebody that was working with me that left and patients wanted to go with them because they had a relationship with them, then that's where they belong. They don't belong with you.
Unfortunately, that's not how these agreements are written up, and it's a real challenge.
Well, and yes, you have handled some for physicians, and the physician ones are really mind-boggling. But I think that the most encumbered are physician associates and nurse practitioners that sign them. And they sign them, I think they, get out of school, they have debt, and they see the chance to have a good income that's stable. And I think that becomes kind of a carrot,
Absolutely.
They dangle that carrot. And then they slowly realize several years down the road that they have essentially signed their life away.
Yeah, it's another area in the industry that you have to really be careful about. I think part of our, consulting and some of the areas that we also get into is this unregulated use of potentially non-FDA approved techniques of various toxins. I mean, like if you're
product,
if you're using things in a non-FDA approved place, and some people view it so restrictive as that, okay, that means I can't use that product. Whereas others say, well, that doesn't mean I can't use the product. It just means that the FDA didn't endorse it for whatever reason.
Or there was no clinical studies for that particular, or there was nothing presented to support the use of it. And that goes into off-label versus, you have non-FDA approved or not FDA approved, and then off-label. And as I have conversations with colleagues, because everybody has a different interpretation of it. And we use things in an off-label manner all the time. There's a wonderful product that's, I believe it's from a company called Filmed in Europe, and it's this NCTF 135 HA. And it's essentially unchained HA with all these beautiful amino acids, and it's just incredible for what it does for the skin. And they have a paper that's been presented in one of the journals of drugs and dermatology, and it really is incredible how when you mix it with Radiesse, you really get this thickening of the dermis, and you see it on ultrasound. So it's incredible. We can't get the product here in the US, but you can get different things from a compounded pharmacy, unchained HA made. You can get things made that are sterile, that are essentially that same product, and you can do your own thing because it's off-label. It's not FDA approved, but all of those products that you're getting from a compounded pharmacy that is regulated, because nobody's coming in and telling you how you can practice medicine, right? But we are constrained by what products we can get legally in this country. And you cannot use products that you can't get from a U.S. authorized
and that's
distributor.
Well, that's an interesting point too, because that topic comes up a lot.
I know.
And what's the product recently? I forget the name of the product. Yeah, Profilo, which is available in the UK, and people are,
it's amazing.
Go to other countries to get it. And unfortunately, I think people here in the States are getting it somehow, some way as well. And
down in Miami, Revelax is being used everywhere down in Miami. That is not FDA approved here in this country. People are using it. People are buying it and using it on their patients. It's just
again, lack of accountability or respect for a particular for the law, frankly. And at that point, the individual's licensure is at odds with the law, and they're going to have to deal with it should something develop in regard to that. That's something that ends up happening. I deal with after the fact. Fortunately, most of my clients ask me ahead of time on things, so
right.
I'm able to help them.
That
to ensure that they're in compliance. Part of the consulting and the things that we deal with, there seems to be some commonality in the industry over product, over issues with product, over techniques. One of the topics we talked about that I want to bring up is this idea of facelifts and some challenges. Is it toxins that are being used in the product?
No.
What is it?
So what we're seeing, I hate to call it a trend because that would mean that it might end. People are moving towards this regenerative concept with regard to even how they're treating their face, and the leaning more towards things like Sculptra and Radiesse for this production of collagen, not from a filler perspective, because filler is revolumization, which is still very necessary, but the use of biostimulators is just more of a regenerative approach. And some people consider it, it's more natural. I don't have a face full of filler. Let me tell you something. There's a lot of people walking around with faces filled with filler that you don't know because it's been done well. So there's always going to be a need for filler. The controversy now that just really became something with social media was talking about the use of specifically Sculptra, and does it create fibrosis and then make it harder for a person to get a facelift? And, you heard our 2 facial plastic surgeons that were here earlier. Yeah, can it make it more challenging for them? Yeah, his dissection might take a little bit longer, but they still accomplish the end goal. So I think that some of the recent recommendations that, again, not a part of a study, but where he did a survey of facial plastic surgeons, like the idea was, if you're going to be somebody that considers getting a facelift, maybe get your Sculptra, but don't plan to get a facelift for about 2 years. And then if you had a facelift, don't get Sculptra for about a year later in case you need some revision. So just a part of the conversations that you have with your patients that are, 50 plus, because you're certainly not anticipating that somebody in their 20s or 30s that might want to start with Sculptra, they're not going to really need to have a conversation about a facelift. But assess the patient and their age and where they are in life. And are you going to consider facial surgery at some point? And if so, when? And just make sure it's a part of your informed consent. There's a lot of people that don't like to admit that they get things done. So there's still a whole stigma with that. Oh, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
People are not as transparent as you and I.
I know that.
So that needs to always be encouraged. Like you have to tell your surgeon, hey, I've had, this done, this done, this done, so that they know what the playing field is that they're coming into and they don't all of a sudden start to dissect and they've encountered a landmine,
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting topic, a hot topic that ironically we just talked about earlier with our peers. Let's jump to a different topic with regard to the practice itself. And I brought up a little bit of the balance that I asked about that you deal with in running the practice. One of the areas that you've become really good at in the practice is negotiation. And I'm bringing that up because, it's towards the end of the year and I would say many practitioners who have their own business have to weigh the decision of adding additional products, equipment to their business, potentially making decisions that have tax implications, positive or negative, depending upon where they are in life in their business. How have you dealt with over the years dealing with salespeople, so to speak, in working through decisions in acquiring equipment or making decisions in regard to the business, especially towards the end of the year?
So I think the first 4 to 5 years, I pushed them off to you.
Yeah, you did.
But now I don't take meetings. Brooke has been a very great gatekeeper for me. I used to have a sign outside the door that said no cold calls, but now she just kind of handles the front door. So I don't take cold calls. And if it's a device that I'm interested in, I reach out, schedule the time for them to come in where I have a slot of time for them. And if I want to move forward, I tell them, send me your best numbers. If it looks good and it seems like a starting point to negotiate, then I will. If not, they don't hear from me again. And I just have grown comfortable realizing that if I can go without it and still accomplish the things that I want to accomplish, which I can, then I'm okay with not having it immediately. It will be meant to be when it's meant to be. And being okay with having the basics and starting with the basics and going from there.
That segues to the discussion. How do you balance your desire to have a particular device, to offer a particular product to you, an additional service to your patient base, recognizing that, you don't want to lose the patients. You think along the lines that some other practices may have this particular device.
Well, that goes right to what you said, though. If a patient doesn't want to stay with me, then I want to wish them well and have them go where they want to go. So I'm okay with that. Because the people that will fit with me will fit with me. And I said on our very first podcast, I have a genuine affinity for anybody that walks through my door and sits in my chair because I get to know them and we have time together. So it is a relationship. But if we need to get a divorce, we get a divorce and you move on. If I can't offer something that I want to offer, but I think it's something that my patient will benefit from, and a perfect example is BBL and Halo. Remember that we looked at that initially, it was like $250,000 for this system. And I'm like, it's just not something that I'm willing to spend the money on. But I've got a great gal over in St. Pete who's with a great plastic surgeon and she does a great job. So that's who you should go see for it. I don't have any problem doing that. And that's just, I think that comes with time. Like you just get comfortable, that provider will provide a great service. And should that patient feel like they gel with that person more, then they need to go and be there.
Well, your theme and the way you sound especially for our listeners and our viewers, is very similar to Zoe. How when we had Zoe
I
on,
just
not as fervent as Zoe.
Our delivery is just a little
but
different.
Your delivery may be different,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, you recognize who you are and what you're willing to accept, and you're at peace with it. In other words, you're not going to try and be something for everyone.
Because you're not.
Yeah.
Because nobody ever can be. You're not going to be the lawyer for everybody. I'm not going to be the provider for everybody, and that's all right. I mean, you may get hurt feelings along the way, and maybe you really felt invested in the relationship with your client or me with the patient, but something happened and it just didn't gel anymore, and it's okay.
That's such a good nugget, though, because that's an area, especially for young, newer business owners or individuals who are starting out in their careers. They want to be everything to everyone, and they want to take it all, and they're concerned about it, and they become self-consumed about this idea is I got to get it all. I got to make sure that this person stays with me. And unfortunately, it's toxic. It can become your worst enemy, because at the end of the day, if that's the approach you take, you cannot be everything to everyone.
Yeah, and you'll never have peace.
And you'll never have peace with it. I think it's an emotional, introspective analysis that an individual has to do in regard to what makes them happy. And unfortunately, youth has a tendency to eclipse that. As you become older, you have a little bit, you're more at peace with some of the decisions.
Because you're also more averse to taking certain risks. And that's another part of it. I think back to being 21 and going into law enforcement, and I sometimes sit back and think, I can't believe that I had a badge and a gun and I was in my 20s and I was a baby and knew nothing about life, certainly. So as you get older, you don't want to take certain risks. And especially in medicine, I'm not willing. I mean, we just watched that special on that surgeon, the one that was putting in artificial airways, the tracheas, and it was all of his research was fraud. And at some point, his
Macalini,
something like that, Paolo. But at some point, his hubris was out of control, and he had no ability to recognize that he was literally experimenting on humans.
He was similar to that Dr. Death.
God complex.
Yeah.
So mind-boggling, right? The story, because at first you don't ever want to hurt someone. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of truth to that wisdom as you get older, because it's not just life experience, but you just become more averse to taking risks with not only just yourself, but with people in general. You start to become a little bit more adept at recognizing, red flags and things that are just disconcerting, and maybe, patients that might need other help versus what you can provide them. I'm all for, there's a very simple survey that we used to use in primary care called a PHQ-9, and it's a very quick assessment on like depression and dealing with a patient. And it's literally a series of bullet point questions that you can ask that they don't know that you're assessing that, but it can really give you some insight into the psyche or what that current frame of mind is for the patient. How are they doing? And especially post-COVID and seeing the variations, and then this political climate we live in, people are a little more fragile and have a little more anxiety that they're dealing with. So you always want to make sure that, especially in aesthetics, that what you're doing for them isn't going to further create, additional problems down the road for them, and that it's truly in their best interest. So I feel there's a lot of hats that an aesthetic provider has to wear in some respects, because you're not just providing aesthetic services in a bubble. You're doing a lot for them.
Well, same thing with the law, practicing the law. It's
yeah. How many, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock texts have you fielded and things with clients? A lot.
You become a psychiatrist. You become, there's a lot of things. You're their savior, their goat sometimes. There's a lot of things that can go.
And sometimes you are the person that angers them the most.
Yeah. Especially if you're telling them the truth about things, which is most of the time, that's what ends up happening. But it is what it is. The area that we talk about as well as, especially with these young individuals going in the industry, is I see all over the place training academies popping up. Mm-hmm. We see them everywhere. And people that want to get into the industry also feel like, I can go to this and get this certification. I go to this place and get that certification. And one of the things that you shared with me that seems to be the case is,
But there's no such certification.
Well, there's not only is there no such certification, it appears that a lot of these medical product companies, whether it be Allergan or MERS or some of these other places that manufacture these products, they pick individuals who sell the most of their product to become their trainers. Not necessarily.
It's a big part of it, but there's also a big part of talent too, because I know some really incredibly talented, especially with Allergan and Galderma. But yeah, there is a big volume. They incentivize it, based on, I think, the volume of it.
Well, that goes to my point. Is it predicated on one's skill set, or is it predicated on, how much product a particular individual is using in their practice? If you may not know.
Well, for instance, with that large plastic surgical group, that carrot was dangled about that for me with, you're here, so we'll do this. Because of the volume. I think that maybe there's a mix of that, but I can't answer that 100% because I know that some of the most skilled injectors like that are even in some of these closed forums that I'm in, they're national trainers and they're unbelievably brilliant.
Well,
but I will say this is important. The only national certifications either in plastic surgery or the certified aesthetic nurse specialty are from ISPAN. And that's because a consensus was reached. It's for nurses, but it's for nurses that are essentially, using quotes, sponsored by either a plastic surgeon, facial or derm. So it's very specific criteria for those to attain that certification. But those are really only the real certifications that are out there for the aesthetic specialty.
So I think our point with regard to this discussion is that you need to be careful as a promising, young individual or somebody who's older and decided to do a second career, if they're going to go in and spend money on getting training and going to an academy to do their due diligence.
It's one thing to get CEUs for your license and stuff like that. We have to do that every year. But I also think about it from a legal perspective. These people that give themselves these titles, I'm a certified master injector. That person, I extrapolate, right? They get dragged into a lawsuit because maybe they had a routine vascular occlusion that caused some sequela down the road that was an issue for the patient. So they get a PI lawyer that takes that case on, and we'll say that it starts with a deposition, and the lawyer that's deposing them asks, you have listed yourself as a certified master injector. What certifying body gave you that title?
Exactly.
And what answer they give? Mary Jo's School of Injectables. There's no entity that can offer that. So I think that I just take issue. I think that I've obviously never used any kind of title for myself. I'm a jack of all trades and a master of nothing.
That's not true.
A humility, right?
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. But you just have to be careful because I know most people, your average person, doesn't think about liability just in their everyday life. Unfortunately, you've paralyzed me with some of that art. But you have to think about those scenarios when you start throwing things out there about yourself. How are you going to answer that question?
Well, it's not only that. It's the general public don't know.
Right. What was the purpose of police body cam? Right. I got out of that long before body. It was for accountability.
Accountability. Yeah.
And so that that you could go and grab footage of an incident, and there it was, black and white. So that's the idea that we have to really ingrain in injectors, aspiring injectors. You have to extrapolate to that worst case scenario, that you are in a situation where something untoward has happened and maybe something isn't bad and you weren't negligent, and that will come out. But you're having to put on record how you have that title or where you got that product from. You have to be able to back up what you have said about yourself, and you have to be able to show that you didn't do anything wrong. You have to defend yourself. So it's the title thing is you got to be careful.
Well, you run into it. We had Dr. Brown on, and he talked about it from a plastic surgeon, cosmetic surgery perspective. And he was sharing with us that other physicians don't even know the difference.
They don't.
Where they make referrals to doctors that aren't even cosmetic doctors. So, I mean...
Or plastic surgeons.
Plastic surgeons. So you run into this all the time. I mean, for an injector to state, I'm a certified master injector, to the general public, they're just going to view that as, oh, that must mean that they're pretty good at what they do, period, even though there's nothing behind it.
Yep.
So it is an area, not to mention the fact of what happens from the liability perspective on and on. But unfortunately,
getting a certificate that you did a course or that you took a course is nothing more than that. Unless you have sat for a certifying exam that like is required of nurse practitioners and physician associates. And again, through ISPAN, nurses can attain certain certifications under certain criteria. Unless you have those types of certifying bodies, then it's not. And anybody that presents it as such that has a training academy, I mean, that needs to be looked at too. You can't claim that you're certifying, and you can certify that they took your course and that you trained them on X, Y, and Z. At the completion of this course, the attendee shall understand A, B, C, D. You can go through that, and that can be a part of it. And you can present your materials to organizations that offer certification for CEUs so that you can present it to your medical board or your nursing board or your PA board. But that's really the extent of it. And that's the stuff too, where again, I think it kind of misleads the consumer, much like how consumers don't understand about cosmetic surgery versus plastic surgery, that kind of thing. So there's just a lot of lack of regulation.
Oh, for sure. Topic that's dear to your heart, dear to my heart, peptides. Just briefly, I know that you've dove into the peptide world, and recently we became aware of some changes in that, and a lot of questions get asked both on, our Instagram platforms, different social media platforms about peptides and their use. And we mentioned earlier about how people can get them illegally, not prescribed. They obviously have to be prescribed by a physician or by a medical provider who's licensed to prescribe. Briefly, what's your take on peptides and how they can help patients?
They can be transformative, truthfully. But it has to be the right set of circumstances and appropriate for what is currently happening in that patient's body. So, you have to look at, I'll take a woman, for example, premenopausal, perimenopausal, postmenopausal, where is that woman, right? I posted something really interesting that I was doing some reading about. We have to look at adipose tissue as a hormone regulator now for estrogen, because we have such an issue with obesity in this country, and obesity at such a younger age. You see young prepubescent girls that are almost looking like they've gone through puberty. They have so much circulating estrogen in their body. So again, there's so much dysregulation, and I think what peptides offer is a way to bring the body into that homeostasis, because we live life today now, go, 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 such adrenal stress, cortisol levels out of control, between the phones and just so many damaging things that we deal with. So it's an opportunity to kind of reset and get your body back to where it needs to be, to a healthy place, so that your immune system functions optimally, that your heart, your lungs, that everything is functioning at optimum capacity for you. And then it also is an opportunity to mitigate disease processes that might already be happening. So I think they're the future, for us. Again, it then comes down to trying to tell us how we can practice medicine, and how a provider practices should always be ethical, but it should be between the provider and the patient.
Well, that independence, right? With regard to, the provider should be making the medical decisions.
Well, with the patient.
With the patient, yeah.
You empower your patient. You give your patient all the pros and the cons, and what are you trying to accomplish, and how can we accomplish that? And then ultimately, the patient has to make decisions. I always tell my patients, I make recommendations, you make the decisions. So that's who the relationship is between. You shouldn't have the government in there with you telling you how to do things with your patient. That's just, I think, an area that's concerning to me. I think you and the patient together make those decisions. And, when you start to kind of handcuff how we can do things for our patients to make them feel better, that's problematic. We have to be conscious of what we're putting into our body. and that's coming through my evolution in this functional medicine journey and education, what we're putting in our body, how it's affecting the function of our body. And now that I've gone through this journey, I mean, this has been a transformation of over a year for both of us, and it's an evolution, but it's just a process. And I don't think that, being handcuffed by anybody with regard to how we practice should be something that's happening. We have to have, if we have the tools available and we have a reliable source of our peptides through pharmacies that we know are reputable and do the right thing, and that's what we should be able to do for our patients.
I think it's a topic that's going to continue to expand, and people are going to want to know more and more about it. And like you said, for us, it's been transformative. Mm-hmm. But there's so many other things that we've done as well.
Yeah, it's not peptides in a vacuum.
It's not just peptides. I mean, it's our diet, it's our exercise regime, it's our lifestyle changes. There's a lot of things that we've done.
Most of my patients, we talk about obviously an anti-inflammatory diet, but the biggest thing is it has to be raw whole foods. Like you don't need to move away from cane sugar or I've recently switched to icorn flour. We've talked about that. It's just your sourcing. You just want to look at the things that you're putting in your body, and I always say peptides are just a piece of that puzzle. They're not everything.
Well, there's no shortcut. Everybody thinks there's a shortcut to things, and there's not. And I talked about this earlier on the podcast, and I've made some reels about it with people, is there needs to be a sustainability associated with whatever approach you take.
Yeah, but I think we're a society of instant gratification.
Yeah, we're the Google world, right?
Paging Dr. Google.
Yeah, paging Dr. Google.
All right, I think they're done.
I think the dogs have decided to say that we're done. Our therapy dogs who
needed us for their therapy.
For therapy. This was fun. I enjoyed it. We'll do it some more. I don't know what format we'll put this in. It'll be either in a Pro-2-Pro podcast or we'll put it on the YouTube channel, but we're going to make some reels out of it too. I hope you all enjoyed listening to us, and remember, keep it Pro-2-Pro. That's all for today's episode of Pro-2-Pro. I hope you enjoyed hearing from our guest and gained some valuable insights into the world of entrepreneurship. Like and subscribe to stay up to date with the latest episodes, and don't forget to follow us on social media. Thanks for watching and listening, and remember to keep it Pro-2-Pro.